Thanks, Richard. By the way, how great was Brie? Hey? There's one of the great pleasures to come to these events and see we've got so many really great young people that believe in the values. And I thought it was interesting, there was a poll out only a couple of days ago. It was in the US, and what it showed that I think it was the 19 to 29-year-olds, that they were actually a 45, 55 or 45 in favour of President Trump. So, and that is happening around the world. We're getting the young people coming through that are rejecting all this socialist nonsense that they've been fed at school. So Brie, more power to you, fantastic speech, and I'll be doing everything I can to help you. And what a time it is to be alive if you are a libertarian. Just as we said, look around the world today. Of course, Harvey Millet, the first true libertarian president. And there was a real danger period in that first 6 to 12 months. There was a real danger period. You had to bring in some hard policies, and the left were going to do everything they can to say how terrible this was. He had to get through that first 12 months. And we knew after he did that, he would be able to turn Argentina around. And look at what has happened in such a short period of time. Now we get to sit back and watch Argentina progress. And don't think this won't rub off on the rest of the South American countries. All those other countries, whether Brazil, Ecuador, Chile, Peru, all those countries are going to see, hang on a minute, look how Argentina is progressing. If we go down their track, we can progress as well. So this will set off a revolution in South America of libertarian policy. Yeah? Then we go across to the UK. Now, many of us have thought over the years that it'll always be, we've got a Westminster system, a Westminster Parliament, you'll always have two parties dominating. And people have said that to me over many, many years. It's two parties, you'll never change it around. It's the same in the UK, it's the same in Canada. Westminster system, two parties. Well, now we've got a situation where we've got Reform with Farage's party actually leading the polls. So we've got Reform, we've got the Labor, we've got the Conservatives actually in third place. And then you've got the Liberal Democrats over there, or the Democrats as they're called, in fourth place. So you've actually got a four-party race over in the UK. So that is a message to us here in Australia. But never think that we get stuck with this two-party system. We can change it, we can really change this around, and we can have that same success here in Australia. And then, of course, the best of all, we go into the USA. And we see what is President Trump. As I said, to me, it's like a football team winning the grand final every day of the week when you turn up and you see all the things that he's doing. And to see him winning, I'm talking many of you would have heard the cheering around the world when he signed those executive orders. Things that we'd been arguing for years about what needed to be done. To see them there was truly for many of us an emotional moment, to see that one after the other after the other. The one I particularly like when he said, getting rid of the World Health Organization. Oh, that's a big one. And he signed it. That was a fantastic, fantastic experience. So that's what the good news we've got around the world. But the bad news is the parlous state of our nation and how our nation today is in decay. Since Albanese has been Prime Minister, average real wages have declined 8%. That is the biggest decline in the history since Federation, that we are going backwards. Real wages in this country are going backwards. That means the average citizen is falling behind. We've seen GDP per capita, which is what really counts. Forget the GDP number, because that's inflated by 1 million migrants coming into the country. It's the GDP per capita, your slice of the pie, that's important. And what have we had? 7 quarters in a row that has gone backwards. 7 quarters. And then there, of course, there's the housing crisis, which to me, I think is the greatest tragedy of all. I know here it's a little bit better, and it's only slightly marginally better than the region areas, but we now have a situation where children that are born and grow up and go to schools in cities can no longer afford to buy a house in that city. So we see in Sydney people leaving the place because they simply cannot afford to buy a house. That is, and when you change society, that a young person in high school is thinking, what are they going to do with their life? What are they going to do with their career? And they're looking for the future. If they think that they have no opportunity to own their part of the country, which is exactly what's happening today. They look at the numbers and they think, in Sydney, I need $1 million to buy anything. How can I need 200 grand deposit? How am I going to possibly borrow $800,000 and pay? The numbers just don't add up for them. Unless they've got some inheritance. The numbers don't add up. And when you do that, you change the psychology of people. You change them from rather being, well, I've got to work hard, I've got to invest, I've got to build my family, to they just think, well, stuff it. I can't do it. And that is the greatest tragedy of this Albanese government, of what they have done. To take away that great Australian dream from a generation of kids is something we should never, ever forgive them for. And we've got to fight them on that issue all the way. So I'd just like to go through 4 main areas where I think the Libertarian policy differs from all the other parties in a way, including One Nation. And I'll start with the most important policy of all, freedom of speech. Because if you don't have freedom of speech, nothing else counts. That's why the framers of the American Constitution, that's why they made freedom of speech in the First Amendment. Because if you don't have freedom of speech, nothing else matters. You don't have a free society. And look at what has happened in the last 3 years in this country. Firstly, the mis- and disinformation bill. Now, never forget, this was Liberal Party policy. I think it's still on Paul Fletcher's website today. The previous Minister for Communications had virtually the same policy that Albanese brought into the Parliament, that we would turn the office of the E-Safety Commission and ACMA into a de facto Ministry of Truth. That was Liberal Party policy. How does that equate with what the Liberal Party is meant to stand for? And yet Albanese brought that in, and I must admit, I thought, well, we've got to fight against this. We've got to fight with everything we can, but we're not going to win. And we rang John Ruddick, and I said, John, mate, we've got to do a rally. Let's do a rally about this in Sydney. I reckon there's enough people that will actually want to voice and protest about this. So we ran a rally. We advertised that rally a couple of days after Labor announced the policy, and we got the rally up, and we got media from that, and that went on and on and on. And finally, when it got down to vote, there were 6 senators that we needed to get that would normally not support the government. We had to get them to say they were going to say no. You know what happened? It was community groups. It was disparate groups, no coordination or no sort of big hand organising it all. Everyone got out there and said, let's write to these senators, let's put the pressure on them and tell them we don't want this legislation. And one by one, they folded. So the lesson from that is that never underestimate the effect that we can have from outside of Parliament, right? It was only because of the citizens of this country that got up and decided, no, I'm not turning my country into a version of 1984. We're not going to have a Ministry of Truth, someone in Parliament that decides what is and what isn't misinformation. We're not going to have that. And enough people thought about it, and we stopped it, and we won. And I'm sure there's many people in this room that joined that fight and joined that email campaign that did it. So the message from that is that your efforts can make a change in this country, and we've shown it with that disinformation bill. Now the second one was the digital ID bill. Now this again was supported by both the Labor and the Liberal Party, rushed through Parliament in record time to give the E-Safety Commissioner all these new powers to work out for herself sometime in the next 12 months how you'll have to have some type of digital ID to log on to social media. So what's going to happen between now and then? When you go and you log on to your social media account, to show that you are over 16 years of age, you'll have to have some form of digital ID. They know that. This digital ID bill and the under 16 bill was all a Trojan horse to force everyone to get a digital ID so they can identify you. So if you say something that is missing disinformation, or you say something that falls foul of this new so-called hate speech legislation, they can come after you and they can shut you up. That's what this was all about. And that was the Labor Party and the Liberal Party that joined hands and passed that through the Parliament. And finally, we had last week, we had that so-called hate speech legislation. So we now, I know Kira Lee's here, and acknowledge Kira Lee of the work she's done over many years. What she has done, and the pressure that she is going through at the moment, if that legislation had been in place, they'd be able to threaten her with 7 years in jail. That's what you'd be facing. So we have a situation, we now live in a country where your political opinion can find that you'll spend 7 years in jail. And again, this was supported by the Liberal Party, the Labor Party. And I know we had One Nation abstaining from this. We've been very solid on this. We will repeal that. Now, if I'm successful in that Senate, on day one, I'll put a bill into Parliament that will repeal that full stop. Lock, stock and barrel, that has to go. We can't be imprisoning people in this country because of their political opinion. And the other thing that is in our party, we've got Rob Cribb here, so Rob, correct me if I say anything that's outside of party lines, but the other policy that we have, and I've argued this for many, many years, I've changed my position a couple of years ago when we saw what was happening during COVID. We should have in this country, in our constitution, the equivalent of the US First Amendment that protects free speech. Huh? I, for many years, listened to all the arguments about this, and I thought, I heard the argument, our Constitution protects, there's an implied right to free speech in there, okay. Well, I say an implied right is not enough. I want it in black and white that says the government can't censor free speech. That's what I want in my Constitution. So in the years ahead, no government, no political party, no politician can come into that Parliament and say, I'm going to give you a mis and disinformation bill where government will decide what is the truth. That is going to be a key difference in our political party going ahead to fight for free speech, because neither the Labor, Liberal or the Teals are going to stand up and fight for that, but we will. The second area of policy where we're quite different is on energy. And energy is such an important thing for any country. It's not just energy because it's a big part of all your consumer bills. It's also important for industry as well. You must have competitively priced electricity if we're going to have competitive industries in this country. Now, I've already seen our last plastic manufacturer close down, Kunos. They closed down last year, gone. We've seen only 2 weeks ago, we've seen the last architectural glass company in this country, Oceana Glass, announced going to receivership and going to close down in Melbourne. The only thing that is keeping our aluminium industry going is a whole lot of government subsidies that they've just rolled out and announced. We cannot survive as a nation and create the wealth that we need if we've got a situation where our electricity prices are more than double what they are in the USA, where our gas prices are more than triple, and where our corporate tax rate is double. We've got to get back to a situation where we can have competitively priced electricity in this country. And the idea that we've got this magnificent black coal seam that runs down our eastern seaboard, that we can ship that off to China to be used in Chinese coal-fired power stations, which they're building by the hundreds, but we can't use it here. That is beyond insanity. But that is the policy of both the Labor and Liberal Party. We have to lock down we can't use our coal-fired power station. Today we have 21 gigawatts of coal-fired power station left. And they're saying, oh no, they will have to close down in the next couple of years. And they've got a chart about when they close down, the 2030 and shortly after. In China from the starting position has over 1,000 gigawatts of coal-fired power. So they've got 50 times more than we have. And under construction, they have over 400 gigawatts of coal-fired power under construction and development. That's 20 times more than what we have. And we think we're going to save the world by closing down our measly 21 gigawatts of coal-fired power station. Our policy is completely insane. The Chinese communists must sit up there in their Politburo and read about what the Australians are doing, and they must be falling on the floor laughing at us, saying, how stupid are these Australians? Because all this does, it means our industry can't compete. So industry production goes offshore. The same goods are made on a higher carbon intensity grid. And so the overall, globally, if CO2 is your thing, CO2 emissions rise, but the wealth goes to China. China haven't signed up to the Paris targets. They haven't signed up to net zero by 2050. They said, oh look, you guys get to 2050 and we might get there by 2060. But we're not going to make any reduction and we'll work it out later. This is like economic unilateral disarmament. That is what we are doing. I can't, and look, I get upset about this because my second election was in 2013. And with Tony Abbott, we marched in the streets against the carbon tax because everyone knew how terrible it was. We had rallies in Canberra in the cities, and people for the first time in their life that had been disassociated from politics took to the streets and marched in the streets against Gillard's carbon tax. Tony won that election in an absolute landslide. We had so many members of Parliament that, as you know, Parliament sort of goes around, you've got the government on the right side, the opposition on the left. We filled all the government benches and had people sitting on the opposition side because that's how big an election picture we had. That was what, and anyhow, we get to government, and then all of a sudden one day I'm sitting in the party room and Tony walks in and says, oh guys, we've decided to sign up to the Paris Agreement, a 28 to 26 production of 2025. And I was sitting next to Angus Taylor. I'm like, Angus. So Angus, mate, did I miss the debate on this? Did I go out for a bathroom break and miss the discussion? There was no discussion whatsoever on that policy change, what we took to the election campaign. And after Tony was finally backstabbed and lost, our officers were together, and I spent a fair bit of time talking. Tony, mate, what happened? And he said, I asked him, mate, why did you do that? Why did you agree to that signing up to Paris? Just now, Tony says, I was misled by the government, we should pull out of Paris. He's the biggest advocate for pulling out of it. So, mate, why did you do? He says, he says, there was Julie Bishop, and there was Turnbull, and there was Pine, and there was Brandis, there was Birmingham, and they were all pressuring me to do it, so I tried to run a collegiate cabinet, and I surrendered. And we ended up, we appeased them. And what happened to Tony? They saw that sign of a weakness, and they stabbed him and got him out of the way. Right? Then we moved forward to 2019 election. We win that election, with Scott Morrison's our new leader, with the policy that we're not going to sign up to net zero. That was the policy we took in 2019. Okay? I walk in the party room. The party room is something similar like this, where the Prime Minister sits at the front, and the Deputy Prime Minister or the Nationals leader sits there, and the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party sits at the table of three, and everyone's sitting there sort of thing. And again, Morrison gets up and he says, we've decided to sign up to the the net zero by 2050. Okay. Where was the debate? Where was the discussion? Where was this? There was no debate in the party room whatsoever. We were railroaded into this nonsense of 2050. Now, what that has done over the that has pushed up electricity prices in this country. It has turned what was our once nation's competitive advantage, low-cost energy that enabled us to pay high wages. We've surrendered that. We've given it away. And I see, I pull my hair, what's left of it, I pull my hair out when I see Chris Blackout Bowen come on and talk about this absolute nonsense about renewables being cheaper. It is complete and utter nonsense. It's not about it being renewable, it's about its intermittency. The more intermittent generation you put into the grid, the higher cost you have to do to back it up. And that's why the more solar we get, the more wind we get, all of a sudden the prices just keep going up and up and up. And so now we can run the country on solar, wind and big batteries. There is not a country anywhere in the world that is doing that. No one. They say, oh yes, but these countries all run on renewable power. But when you look at it, you find they're almost 100% hydropower. Tiny little micro grids running on hydropower. That's how you find these countries 100% renewable. No country in the world is attempting to do what we are doing because common sense, anyone that passed Lego in kindergarten knows it doesn't work. A rough estimate, I've done just a rough estimate, to back up one night's electricity on the national grid. So remember, in winter time, you've got no solar power from about 4 o'clock to about 8 o'clock in the morning. So you've got a window of 16 hours where you've got no solar power. And you cannot rely on the wind. They say, oh yes, but the turbines, you can have a big wind drought across the entire grid. So you've got to have, even if you allow for snowy hydro coming online, and don't, what a white elephant that is, right? Even allowing for snowy hydro coming online, we're going to have to spend for one night around about $200+ billion to back up one night with batteries. And one night's nowhere enough because you've got to be able to, if you use all that power one night, you've got an 8-hour window during the next day to recharge yourself, 16 hours of batteries to get through the next night. So you're going to need at least 4 or 5 nights worth of backup of batteries. You are starting to talk $600 to $1 trillion worth of cost. The thing is a complete madness. Unless we turn this around, we're going to become a very, very poor country. And that's one of the things that distinguishes us in the Libertarian Party from what Liberal, Labor and the Nationals are doing. And shame on the Nationals for not standing up better on those policies. The third important policy is migration. Now, I'll give you some rough numbers. From the end of World War II to the Sydney Olympics, we had around about 60 to 80,000 annual net migration. And by net migration, I mean that's the net number. So each year people depart Australia, they immigrate out of Australia, go overseas to live against people that come in. So we had about 60 to 80,000 as the average, right? After the Sydney Olympics, about 2003, 2004, the Howard government kicked it up to about 200,000. And Labor kicked that up again, and they kept that around about, so we doubled it from around, we almost tripled it to sort of 240,000 a year, which was a much higher number than we've ever had before, right? And if you look at some of the graphs, the minute that we started that excess migration levels, that was when the differential and the housing prices started to kick up much, much higher than general inflation. And when Albanese, he mentioned none of this about the last election. In fact, in Labor's first budget, in the budget papers, they said 235,000 net migration for the first year and the second year. The actual number was more than double. It was close to 500,000 each year. So the first 2 years of the Albanese government, we had 1.4 million new migrants come into the country, 400,000 people leaving, giving us an intake of 1 million people in 2 years. How the hell is the country meant to produce the infrastructure, the hospitals, the schools, the roads and the houses for 1 million new people coming into Australia in just 2 years, 24 months? It is diabolical. So, and so what happened? Rents went through the ceiling. So we've seen a 40 to 50% rise in rents, and house prices went through the ceiling. And that might be great if you've got multiple properties like our Prime Minister, Mr Albanese, does. He's done fantastically well out of this policy of pushing up housing prices. Right? But for the average citizen, you've got to live somewhere. And it means that if you've got 2 kids, it just means it's going to be much more difficult for them to get in the housing market. So we need to do 2 things. Firstly, we need a very substantial cut in the number of migrants that come into this country. And we're just finalising that, what number we'll be announcing as the Libertarians, but it will be a very substantial cut from where it is. And secondly, it's not just about the numbers, it's about the type of migrants that we get. Now, we want to have a policy that makes sure that people are coming into this country bringing the skills that they need, the skills that the country needs. And there's no point having bureaucrats in Canberra deciding that what that is. That should be business and industry, and that's what our policy does. So we've got to have a complete rechange. We've got to be able to stand up there and clearly debate these issues. So if you're talking to your friends, use those numbers. 1 million migrants in 2 years, more than double what we'd ever had before, is beyond the country's infrastructure. And we see Labor people running, oh, we need to build more houses and all this nonsense, right? We're world champions at house builders. Right? You can't catch up, you simply can't catch up from those numbers. You don't have the capacity in the economy. So that's something we're going to change around. We've got to make sure that we can restore the Australian dream for a generation of kids. That's the most important thing I think we can do of all our policies. I could go on a lot more. Of course, we're going to have a COVID Royal Commission, very important. But one I'll just leave you, the last one I'll leave you is the policy on motoring. So this has got no publicity whatsoever. The Liberals are running down on it, it's Labor Party, and again it's all tied to this net zero nonsense. So I'll try and explain how it works, okay? Every new motor car that is on the market today has a CO2 rating. And the rating is the number of grams of CO2. When we're talking about the sparkling mineral water I saw somewhere here, that's the bubbles in the sparkling mineral water. It's not the salt or the dust, dirt or the pollution, it's the sparkling mineral water. How many grams of CO2 it emits per kilometre? And that depends on how many, the fuel efficiency of the vehicle. So if you're driving with a bigger vehicle, it's not as fuel efficient, but if you're driving on country roads, you don't want a little tiny car that might be suitable for the city. Right? If you're going to be out these country roads, you're going to run into a kangaroo or some livestock or something, you want something that's a pretty big vehicle with a dirty big bull bar in front of you, right? Which you don't have which you don't need in the city. You want to be able to the distances. You don't have to find somewhere. And so the traffic that comes up the Pacific Highway during Christmas holidays, how is that going to work if everyone's in an electric car? So we're going to build like 100 charging stations. There's 100,000 cars coming up here every couple of hours. You can't, and they're going to, what if you're driving from Sydney to Brisbane or Sydney to Port Macquarie, how are these cars all going to charge up? It's just, because I've argued this against this view, right? So, I'll give you an example. The Ford Ranger is our top selling car. Its CO2 rating is around 200 grams of CO2 per kilometre, right? Now that is then measured against what the government calls an emissions standard, which decreases every year. So this year it's 114. I think next year it goes down to 92. 2028 it goes down to 68. 2029 it goes down to 58. And for every gram that Ford Ranger is above that threshold, there's $100 per gram fine, which is indexed to CPI. So it's more than $100, right? So by the time we get to in 3 years' time, when we've got, say, the threshold 68, right? A Ford Ranger is going to be 130 grams. So you've got 200 grams for the Ford Ranger, 68 is the standard. So that's 132, is that correct with my maths? 132 grams above the threshold. $100 by 132, $13,200 tax on that new Ford Ranger in 3 years' time. A Nissan Patrol, a big V8 Nissan Patrol, is rated around about 260 grams of CO2. So the tax on that will be round about tax, fine. They'd say, oh, it's not a tax, it's a penalty, it's a levy, it's an obligation, it's a liability that the importer has to pay to the government. For a Nissan Patrol, it will be $20,000. And then after 4 years, they haven't said it there, but it gives the minister the ability to change it by regulation. So that's going to come down again. So this is a massive new tax on the price of new cars, which will just make it more and more expensive and simply mean for many people that they can no longer afford to buy a new car. That pushes up the price of used cars. So if you want to go and buy a good used car, that price is going up as well. It's going to make motoring more expensive in this country, right? And yet Chris Barn rocks up, oh look, I'm making motoring cheaper for people. Firstly, you've got the higher costs of buying these cars, these electric cars to start with. Then you've got the higher insurance costs. If you've got an electric car, go and check what your household insurance is, or if it's done at your business, how much extra insurance is going to go up, and how much it is extra to insure these electric cars. So they have a little bingle, they cost a fortune to fix. Sometimes they've got to be written off completely. And then there's the depreciation costs. We know these electric cars are depreciating much quicker. So this is going to put more expensive vehicles, going to take more money out of our pockets, right? Okay, and what's it going to achieve? So we're paying all this money, what's it going to achieve? Well, Chris might go, oh, I'm reducing CO2, right? No, you're not, Chris, because firstly, you are not including the additional manufacturing emissions of that vehicle. So if you're looking at the emissions that are done between manufacturing a electric car versus a petrol car, the electric car has so many more emissions in its manufacturing. In fact, VW has done a comparison of their VW, the Golf, the electric version versus the diesel version. The electric version has double the emissions than what the petrol version does. So by every time you bring a new electric car in the market, the emissions immediately go up. And then the question is, can you offset those emissions over the lifespan? How far do you have to drive that vehicle to offset those additional emissions? And that all, of course, depends on the carbon intensity of the grid. Now, most of these electric cars will be charged in New South Wales, Queensland or Victoria at night. And what runs the grid at night in those states? Coal. So we're going to run all these electric cars on coal. Now, none of that counts in Bowen's calculations. So VW have actually done their calculations, and they say in Australia, you'll never offset the additional manufacturing emissions. So even if you believe that CO2 is this magic control knob, we're going to get higher CO2 emissions from this policy. Right? And then they say, oh, well, it will lower pollution. It will be much cleaner. Well, again, the peer-reviewed studies in science doesn't agree. So they show that a modern petrol diesel engine, the most of the particulate pollution, which is called dust or soot or smoke in the atmosphere, is not from the tailpipe, it's from the tyres that wear down. And as the tyres wear down on the road and digs up the road, right, that's where most of the pollution comes from that we should be worried about. The real pollution, I call the particulate pollution. Right? So because an electric car is about 400 kilograms heavier, there's more wear and tear on the tyres. So you get the tyres wear out quicker, so you've got those tyres and all that sort of the black rubber in the tyres wearing down, going up in the atmosphere. So these studies are showing that you actually get more urban pollution from an electric car because of the greater weight. It is an absolute diabolical dog of a country, and we've got to get out there and spread the message to people about this. I was talking to Rob on the way up in the car. So Rob, we've got to try and produce some brochure. We've got to get out into the car show, get out to all the car shows. We go and explain this to people, because I find a lot of people, they're switched off on politics, but they love their cars. They love their cars, right? And you tell them that the government, both the Labor and Liberal Party, want to muck around with their cars and put this new tax on. And if you want to go and buy a big a big new Ford Ranger, there's going to be like an extra $15,000 tax you're going to have to pay. These people are going to pull the pitchforks out. And then they're going to be on our side. So that's one thing we really need to work hard on. Look, so there, I'm happy to take some questions. I forgot how we're going for time on things, but they're just four of the policies where we in the Libertarians are completely distinguished from the other major parties. So my final message tonight is fight, fight, fight. Right? We're going to help beautiful ladies like Bree, right? So whatever you can do to help her, but where we found that is really important is manning the booths on election day. Our past results have shown if we can get people on booths with a yellow t-shirt on, with a couple of Libertarian signs behind them, and put something in their hands, say vote Libertarian, our vote goes up 300%. So it is so important to get people on booths. So you guys have got to not only get on booths, but you've got to get out there, you've got to be recruiters for this lady. So you've got to get out there and talk about these policies. Talk about what they're doing on cars to your mates and your neighbours. Talk about what the migration, how the migration is destroying the Great Australian Dream. Talk about how this madness of this net zero is putting our nation at a competitive disadvantage against China and how we're surrendering our wealth to China. Talk about the importance of freedom of speech and how that's the basic core fundamental belief of our party, freedom of speech. And if they give you a scintilla of support, look them in the eye and say, look, your country needs you, we need your help. Can you give me 1 hour on election day to help hand out brochures on those policies? Morning or night, 1 hour. And you'll generally find if you ask people, they'll generally say yes. You can tell them, morning or night, whenever the election comes on, get their details, talk to them, and then you find you convert them from 1 hour into half a day. And you convert them from half a day into a booth captain that puts the signs up. And then you convert them to a recruiter that brings 4 or 5 of their mates along to look after one booth. That's, I think, one of the best things that we can do to help Bree and to help our other candidates going forward, is to get in there and recruit, to get as many people as we can on those booths, yellow t-shirts, how to votes in hand, caps on, handing out. Look, I'll leave it there. It's great to see so many people here.